Welcome back, deep divers. Ready to explore another fascinating corner of history?
Always.
Well, today we're heading to South India,
Ooh,
to the Vijayanagara Empire,
nice.
around the 14th to 17th century CE.
Sounds good.
Now, I've been poring over these historical texts and recent scholarship,
Mm-hmm.
and I gotta say, the Vijayanagara Empire, it wasn't just about, emperors and battles and all that.
Right.
There's a vibrant society, complex social structures, bustling city life.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're talking about a civilization that really thrived. We'll be taking a look at sources that reveal everything from the dynamics of their caste system
Which gets pretty interesting.
to what it was actually like to walk those city streets.
Yeah, and get this, our sources hint at some pretty clever tactics used by the Vijayanagara kings.
Oh.
They used land grants to Brahmins, not just for religious reasons,
Uh-huh.
but as a way to, expand their influence. Really strategic.
It's a perfect example of how religion and politics and economics were all intertwined in Vijayanagara.
Exactly. Okay, so before we get to all that juicy stuff,
Right.
let's set the stage.
Okay, so picture this. South India in the 14th century. The once powerful Delhi Sultanate is in decline.
Crumbling, yeah.
And this power vacuum, well, it creates the perfect opportunity for, let's say, two ambitious brothers.
Enter Harihara and Buka.
Exactly. And their timing, you couldn't script it better. Their rise coincides with a major economic upswing in South India.
So they're in the right place at the right time, basically.
Exactly. And they were smart. They forge alliances with local chiefs. They consolidate power. They were ready to seize the moment.
So Vijayanagara, it becomes a major player on the scene.
Oh, yeah, a force to be reckoned with.
Now, speaking of being in the right place, how
Mhm.
much did their location, geographically,
Oh, it's crucial.
play into their economic success?
Huge role. Vijayanagara was strategically located, right in the middle of these major trade routes,
Uh-huh.
connecting them to, well, the entire world, basically. So you've got all these valuable goods flowing through. Spices, textiles, precious stones.
It's like a global marketplace centuries before, the internet.
Exactly. And that brought in not just wealth, but new ideas, different cultures, this really cosmopolitan atmosphere.
Wow, imagine the energy of that place. It must have been exhilarating to be in Vijayanagara during that
Oh,
time.
absolutely.
But okay, with all this going on, all this economic activity,
Yeah.
how did their society, keep it together?
Well, like most of India at the time, the caste system played a big role.
But was it different in Vijayanagara?
It was the foundation of their social structure, but like with everything in Vijayanagara, there are these unique twists. So you have your four main varnas: Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras.
Right, each with their, specific roles and duties.
Exactly. But it gets more complicated when you factor in the jatis.
Jatis, remind me, those are like the subcastes, right?
Precisely. Think of them as being very specific to occupations and social standing.
So you could have several jatis within one varna.
Yes, each with its own set of rules and traditions. For example, within the Vaishya Varna, you might have separate jatis for textile merchants or spice traders, even bankers.
So it's not just about your general varna.
No,
Your jati really defines your life.
completely. Your
Uh-huh.
profession, who you could marry, even where you lived in the city, it impacted everything. And this is where it gets really interesting because Vijayanagara's prosperity really put this jati system to the test.
You mean challenged it?
Yeah, exactly. Imagine a skilled artisan from a lower jati suddenly becoming wealthier than a merchant from a higher one. It kind of shook things up.
And the system had allowed for that kind of movement.
Well, it was generally rigid, but there's evidence that the economic boom did create some opportunities for social mobility.
Fascinating. So there was, hope for advancement, even within this structured system.
We'll get into specific examples a bit later. But it's important to note that this economic success wasn't just affecting individuals. It impacted the entire empire, even the royal court.
Right, because all that Roman gold flowing into Vijayanagara
Yeah. Oh, yeah, tons of it.
must have had a, ripple effect throughout society.
Absolutely. Merchants involved in that trade, they became incredibly wealthy, and it strengthened the king's power, gave them resources for these ambitious projects, expanding their influence even further.
It's like a chain reaction.
Mm.
This economic prosperity impacting individual lives all the way up to the royal court.
Exactly. And when we talk about power dynamics, well, we can't forget about the relationship between the Vijayanagara kings and the Brahmins.
Right, the Brahmins at the top of the caste system.
Yeah.
The intellectuals, the spiritual leaders.
Exactly.
It makes sense the kings would want them on their side.
Oh, for sure.
But wasn't there a risk, though? I mean, wouldn't showering them with favors create resentment among the other Janakis?
That's a really good question, and it's a delicate balancing act, and that's exactly what we'll explore next, how the kings navigated those complexities. So you're asking about, potential resentment from other jatis because of the king's favoritism toward Brahmins.
Right, right.
Yeah, and it's a good point. But the kings, they were pretty clever about how they handled those land grants. It wasn't just about, enriching the Brahmins. It was part of a bigger strategy for expansion and control.
Okay, so how did this whole land grant system work? What was the king's angle
Yeah.
beyond just, keeping the Brahmins happy?
Think of it this way. When the Vijayanagara kings conquered a new territory,
Right.
they needed a way to solidify their rule, to integrate those regions into the empire,
Uh-huh.
and granting land to Brahmins. Well, it served several purposes.
Okay.
First, it helped to spread their cultural and religious influence into these new areas.
I see.
Brahmins, they were respected for their knowledge, their piety. They would establish temples, set up educational institutions. They basically acted as cultural ambassadors for the empire.
So it wasn't just about the land itself.
No.
It was about the influence that came with it.
Exactly. And there's more.
Yeah.
By giving Brahmins tax exemptions
Oh.
and some administrative control over these lands, the kings were creating this loyal network of administrators spread throughout the empire.
So the Brahmins became like an extension of the royal administration.
That's a good way to put it.
Wow, that's fascinating. But wouldn't that make the Brahmins super powerful? How did the kings maintain the balance of power?
Well, that's where the king's strategy comes in. They were smart about it. They would grant land to different Brahmin families, different lineages, so no single group could become too dominant.
I see.
And the kings, they always kept control of the military and other key aspects of governance.
Right, so they made sure the real power stayed in their hands.
Exactly.
This is like a high-stakes chess match.
Yeah.
But how did all of this affect the everyday people in Vijayanagara? Earlier, we were talking about how the economic boom, might have allowed some people to move up in the jati system.
Yeah.
What kind of opportunities were there?
Well, think about those bustling marketplaces we talked about.
Oh, yeah.
They weren't just for commerce. They were
Right.
hubs for social and economic mobility, too.
Okay.
A skilled artisan, for example, could get noticed for their work,
Mm-hmm.
attract wealthy patrons, and, elevate their family's standing within their jati.
So talent and hard work could lead to a better life,
Yeah.
even within the caste system.
To a certain extent, yes. And it wasn't limited to artisans. A savvy merchant could also gain wealth and status. We even see some people managing to move between jatis.
Really?
It was rare, of course.
Yeah, I bet.
And probably depended on a lot of things, specific circumstances, a bit of luck.
Still, pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So we're seeing these economic forces creating these, cracks in this seemingly rigid social structure.
Right.
Did this prosperity impact education in Vijayanagara?
Definitely. Education was super important in Vijayanagara, and the economic boom, well, it fueled the growth of all kinds of educational institutions.
Yep.
Temples often served as centers of learning,
Yeah.
and wealthy patrons, they would support scholars and teachers. I'm sure those land grants to Brahmins probably played a role in all this, too.
Right, because those grants often included funding for schools, right?
Yeah, and support for scholars. But here's something interesting. Education wasn't limited to, the elite
Wow.
or to religious studies.
Okay.
There were also institutions for vocational training, teaching people practical skills, for different trades and crafts.
So we're seeing investment in both intellectual and practical knowledge. What a cool combination. I'm curious now about how this all played out in daily life. What was it like to actually live in Vijayanagara? Did the jati system function differently in the cities versus rural areas?
That's a great question. And the answer is, well, it's complicated. But one thing's for sure, Vijayanagara's cities were these vibrant, diverse places. And yes, still very much structured by the jati system. But to really get a feel for it, we need to, walk those bustling streets. Picture yourself there,
Oh, I'm already imagining those marketplaces, all the sights and sounds and the energy. That's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so we've been talking about Vijayanagara as this, economic powerhouse, the center of trade and culture with this intricate social hierarchy shaped by all these forces, right? But I'm really curious to know, what was it actually like to be there? on the ground.
Okay, try to imagine this. You're walking through the streets of Vijayanagara.
Okay.
It's a sensory overload. You've got vendors calling out, selling stuff from all over the world.
Hello.
The air is thick with the smell of spices, incense from the temples. You hear blacksmiths hammering away.
I love it.
Brightly colored textiles everywhere you look.
It sounds amazing.
It's this incredible mix of activity, this cosmopolitan energy.
So amidst all this, vibrant chaos, where does the jati system fit in? Did people from different jatis live and work together?
It wasn't like strictly divided neighborhoods or anything.
Okay.
Think of it more like this really intricate tapestry. All these different threads woven together.
I like that.
You'd have streets full of shops, each run by artisans from different jatis, each with their own specialty.
Right.
Temples and religious places where people from all the different varnas would go.
Yeah.
And of course, the marketplaces, these big open spaces where everyone came together to buy, sell, exchange ideas, everything.
So despite this social hierarchy, there was still this sense of shared space, this common ground.
For sure. Those marketplaces, they weren't just about the economy.
Right.
They were social hubs, too. Real community spaces.
And maybe all that contributed to the, social mobility we were talking about.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
That shared urban life, combined with Vijayanagara's booming economy, it definitely created some opportunities.
Makes you wonder what kinds of conversations were happening in those markets.
I know, right?
What deals are being struck, the stories being shared.
Yeah, so much history in those interactions.
But let's not forget, these market squares were also carefully planned out.
Like, speaking of planning, we haven't talked much about those impressive waterworks.
Oh, yeah. Vijayanagara was famous for their water management systems.
It wasn't just about irrigation, was it?
Nope. They had this elaborate network of tanks and canals and aqueducts,
Wow.
bringing water to the cities, enough for drinking, sanitation, even those beautiful fountains and bathing tanks you see at the temples and palaces.
So they were great engineers on top of everything else.
Definitely. And that urban planning, it extended to the layout of the cities themselves.
Oh, so?
Well, the streets were often laid out in a grid pattern,
Oh, smart.
made it easier to move around, helped with trade and all that.
So efficient and aesthetically pleasing.
Exactly. And speaking of aesthetics, we can't forget those magnificent temples,
Oh, yeah.
those gopurams.
Right, those massive gateways.
So elaborately carved, these architectural masterpieces.
They really are breathtaking.
They weren't just religious structures, though. They were statements, about power, wealth, cultural sophistication. They're a testament to the skill of those Vijayanagara artisans.
Oh, absolutely. And the temples, they weren't just for worship.
Okay.
They hosted festivals, performances. They were even centers of learning sometimes.
So much going on. We've got this complex jati system, these bustling markets, this incredible infrastructure, those amazing temples. Feels like we've barely scratched the surface.
I know, right? And that's the thing with Vijayanagara. There's always more to explore, more layers to peel back.
It's such a rich history.
But if I had to sum it up in a few words, I'd say it was a society that embraced paradox.
Paradox. What do you mean by that?
Well, think about it. We've got this rigid social hierarchy, but also opportunities for people to move up, this deep respect for tradition, but also this desire for innovation, this grand imperial vision existing alongside these really intimate details of everyday life.
Yeah, see what you mean.
It's that tension, that interplay, that makes Vijayanagara so fascinating.
It wasn't perfect, but it was definitely dynamic.
Yeah, it was a complex society, full of life, a very human story.
And I think that's a good reminder that history is more than just names and dates.
Right.
It's about understanding how societies work, the choices people made, the things they left behind.
Exactly.
So for our listeners who are now hooked on Vijayanagara, what's one big takeaway they should remember from this deep dive?
I think it's important to remember that human societies, even ones that existed so long ago, they're rarely simple. There's always more going on than you think at first. And maybe, just maybe, by learning about the past, we can better understand our own present.
Well said. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up our exploration of the Vijayanagara Empire. Thank you for joining us.
Until next time, keep exploring.